lawyer, trainer, chief civility officer, owner of her own company, Train Extra. She's got a story to tell. We want to talk about her story. We want to talk about something really, really important today, and how outbreaks create fear. So, and it's such an important issue right now, and something that I think needs to be addressed. And I think the best person to address it today on my show is Sejal. So, yay,
Awesome.
welcome.
Yay. Thank you. This is so important. It's such a huge topic. And so when you said, let's talk about it, I was like, yes, let's do this, please. We need to raise awareness on this topic. And so anywhere and any place I can talk about this, I'm ready.
Yeah. So, why don't we start out first with who you are, where you came from, and why this might be an important, what you do is your passion. Number one, why what you do is your passion. And number two, why, why
Sure.
that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Summer, I'm an employment lawyer. I have litigated employment law cases representing management for over 15 years. And primarily the cases I've worked on a lot are harassment, discrimination, workplace bullying, retaliation type cases. And over the years, I found that I really had a passion for training because a lot of times I was explaining to people what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. And what I found was a lot of times people have good intentions and they're trying to do the best that they can, but it's just confusing and they don't know how to react or what they should do in certain situations. And I found that there was a huge gap between what organizations were doing to really provide effective education to their employees versus what was really needed out there. And a lot of times the lawyers end up filling this gap, or sometimes HR ends up filling this gap, but it just wasn't enough. And so I was educating people all the time. And so 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to really take on more of a proactive approach. So I started up my own business called Train Extra. And I provide, I would say 95% of my business is just traveling around the world, training both managers and employees on a lot of different issues, especially, I would say the top few that I deal with a lot are obviously sexual harassment, diversity and inclusion. I do a lot of unconscious bias training, workplace bullying and violence prevention, and then I do a lot of basic supervisory training. So that's really kind of what I've been doing for the last couple of years.
Okay. So
Yeah.
let me ask you, let's take a step back and let's talk a little bit about your own personal journey and where you've come from and why this might be tapping into, your own journey and how this applies to today.
Absolutely. And what I'm going to actually do is, if it's okay, I want to tell you that I want to talk about that story that I told you about what happened to me at the airport and
Yes,
then go back from there.
sure.
Because I think that really kind of ties it all together in the way that I think communicates why this is so important to me.
Perfect.
So what happened was right when all of this stuff with COVID-19 was starting to happen, I did my last training, which was in Alaska. It was from March 15th through 16th.
Okay.
I flew out to Alaska to do, this was right before the lockdown, right before Governor Newsom in California said, okay, we're having the lockdown now. And so I flew to Alaska, and I flew out from San Francisco to Fairbanks, Alaska, and I was going out there to do some training for the Bureau of Land Management on civil treatment. So I'm ready to go do this training. I'm at the airport. And I noticed, I mean, at this point, people were already wearing masks, and a lot of media had jumped on board, and there was so much information out there. A lot of it was inaccurate at this point. And so I noticed right away there was this couple walking by, an Asian-looking couple. I presume they were Chinese. I don't know for sure, but they were Asian looking, and they both had masks on. And it was probably in the early 50s, couple walking by. And I'm very sensitive, and I noticed right away that heads were turning. I noticed one couple was sitting on the side, and they kind of looked at each other as the couple walked by and whispered something, and I didn't hear what they said. Okay, so a lot of what I'm saying right now was my own conclusions based on what I saw, but I kind of make credibility assessments for a living, and I judge people as part of what I do as an attorney.
Right.
So I get, and I could just, it was pretty obvious to me that they were talking about this couple, right?
Okay.
And it really impacted me. And then later on, I was waiting at my gate, and the couple came to the gate next to me. And as they were waiting in line, I mean, there it was clear cut. I mean, I could just see people were straight up talking about this couple. There was no doubt in my mind. And it just really impacted me a lot. And the next day, I pulled this out because I wanted to talk. This is what I posted on LinkedIn the next day after I witnessed this. I said, evil acts against Chinese folks are happening everywhere. People will ultimately destroy humanity, not this coronavirus. Don't hurt innocent people because of your fear of the unknown or the future. This virus is temporary. The consequences from your hatred and malicious conduct will follow you forever.
Right.
So obviously,
Yes.
I was pretty frustrated and pissed off about what I'd witnessed and emotional about it. And so looking, I kind of was like, should I post this? Should I not post it? And I literally almost pressed delete 5 times before I posted it on LinkedIn because I didn't know if it would be rub people the wrong way, but I don't care. I look at it now and I'm glad I did,
Right.
because I wanted to raise awareness of this issue.
Right.
It's happening everywhere. And so I don't regret it one bit, but maybe I should have waited till I calmed down.
I just did a video today on deep breathing, so we want to take a deep breath. Here's the thing. I want to thank people right now for joining us. We've got some folks on with us. I want to introduce you again. This is Sejal Thacker. She is a lawyer, trainer, chief civility officer, owner of her own business, Train Extra. We're talking about a range of subjects. We're talking about how outbreak will ensue fear or create fear. And I'll touch on briefly what fear is. Let me just mention right now, fear. Fear is a feeling of that is triggered by feeling threatened or in danger. And so, and this can be imagined or real fear. So we're talking about, fear right now. Number one, fear, how outbreaks can create fear and cause discrimination, be a cause of discrimination. And what better person to talk about this but Sejal, who goes around the country to talk about, again, I want you to restate what you talk about when you travel around the country, because it's so important what you do.
Yeah, I mean, it started with me talking about, harassment and discrimination in the workplace and how do we prevent that from happening, because it was happening everywhere. And we spend a lot of time at work. And like I was saying earlier, I think a lot of people come to work to be part of a team and do their best work, but then they're dealing with these behaviors. A lot of times it's intentional. Like what I was seeing at the airport,
Right.
That was intentional behaviors, right?
Right.
But there's the other side of the coin that I do a lot of training on too, is the unconscious bias piece, because a lot of it is unconscious.
Right.
We hear all this stuff on the media, half of it's BS, and now we start formulating these beliefs based on what we've heard. So if somebody walks by that looks Asian, and we're like in our heads already like, oh my God, do they have the disease?
Right.
Right?
So let's go back to, you've told this story, you're in the airport, you see these people walking through, this couple who is about 50 years old, who are Asian, that are walking through the airport as you're leaving. Is it leaving San Francisco to go to Alaska or coming back?
Leaving to go to Alaska.
Leaving, and people are staring at this couple, and you're, I would say, somewhat of an assumption, but you're reading the crowd, you're trying to understand what's going on, and you think that there might be a bias against this couple. So you tell this story, and now you're going to take us back to why you're feeling this way. Let's take us back to maybe Chicago. Is it Chicago where you grew up? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so the way that this impacted me, and I mean, you probably can explain this better than I can, but I thought I had dealt with what I had gone through growing up myself, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But this issue, like, it literally took me back in time in my mind, and all of a sudden I was reliving what I went through, and part of the reason why I do what I do now. So my parents, they came to America in '74. and I was born in Chicago. And I grew up in an all-Italian neighborhood called Elmwood Park. In my family, we were the first and only Indian family in this all-Italian
Wow.
town in the 70s, right? So
Wow.
this is
Yeah.
the 70s. And so I dealt with a lot of discrimination and harassment based on my race, my religion, my skin color, my culture, my gender. So I dealt with a lot of these things, and I've coped with it. And then again, like I was saying, you think you've gotten over it and you're okay now, and then something like you see something and it just triggers those emotions
Right.
and feelings all over again. And so there was an incident, because I wanted to give you a couple examples of what I went through, because
Please.
it really shows the connection. So especially what this happened right here, right? So when I was in, I went back and I was trying to think when it was. It was either 7th or 8th grade in junior high. And we started a new semester in the fall, and there was 4 or 5 new kids that started. And out of those 4 or 5 kids, there were 2 South Asian kids that were coming into the school. And and then a couple weeks later, there was a lice outbreak at the school. Now, I don't know where it started, okay? I don't know if it was the Indians. I don't know if it was the other new kids that came. I don't know who did it. But all I can tell you is, one for 100%, it wasn't me that started the outbreak. But all of a sudden, all I was hearing was, oh, lice came from India. All Indians have lice. And now I was put into this group of people and stereotyped and categorized and made to feel like I had done something wrong. Now, whether or not those kids brought it or not, we all know that it has nothing to do with where, if you're Indian or not. It usually is from the place of origin, similar to what we're dealing with COVID-19. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, so that was one incident where I was lumped into this category without having done anything wrong and being punished for it and treated differently or unfairly
Right.
for it.
So how did you cope through that? How did you, as a child, being in junior high, how did you handle that? How did you cope with that? And how does this, and obviously there is some hypersensitivity, because it does trigger you and it does warp you right back into that place where there was that bias towards you.
Yeah, I mean, I just dealt with it, Summer. I didn't have a lot of people to talk to back then. My parents were busting, their butts on making a living and providing for the family. I didn't really have a lot of support. I was the oldest child, so I was taking care of a younger brother and a younger sister. This wasn't just something that was talked about. You just kind of dealt with it and did the best you could, and that's what I did.
And that raises a really good point. That wasn't something that we really talked about. So we come from a generation where it's like, okay, take care of yourself. What happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. These things aren't really talked about. So yet, this is what's really critical here, is that our generation, even though we grew up like that, here we are now trying to talk about these things, trying to give resources for others to be able to talk about these things, and to really limit and minimize what's happening in relation to biases and feelings, and being able to talk about those feelings and giving strategy. So you talk a little bit more about, let's go back to present day, and thank you so much for explaining and talking about your own experience, because I think that's really important in relation to why this is such a passion for you, why this is so important for you as a person, as a lawyer. And now it's just not a passion project. You are an attorney that goes around the country and talks about, biases, unconscious bias, all these different very valuable things to really start helping employers protect their employees.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a passion of mine, because, I coped with it. And I just wanted to say thanks for pointing out that we didn't have a lot of resources and we just did the best we could, because I coped with it. But let's make no mistake, like, it definitely impacted me, in my relationships with people, my interactions. I was guarded a lot of the times. And I always found myself, I always tell myself, like, I was tough over it. But then you realize when you experience it again that, wow, it's still there and it's still something I deal with. And part of the reason why I do what I do is because I know that, I got through it, but not everybody is as resilient or as tough or can get through it and survive it the way I did. I want to make sure that people have resources. And so I did want to point out, just for the people, if there's anybody here or if anybody listens to this, for the people, if they've experienced it, if you're Asian American or Chinese and you're experiencing this kind of racism, I mean, definitely get some help on this issue, because over the last few weeks, especially a couple of weeks, the increase of events that I've been reading about on social media, I looked at some examples here, and I think it's just important to kind of say, like, look at what's happening because of fear, because of anxiety and stress, and all of these things are bringing out more discriminatory behavior, whether it's overt or microaggressions resulting from unconscious biases, but it's happening, and we can't ignore it. And this is the thing.
And
This is a thing.
let me interject here too, because you talk about unconscious bias, but there's also a conscious bias here. And so we have to take responsibility. And what's happening too is there's modeling for this. And so if we're hearing this on TV from people in high positions, it really is significant where this is a Chinese disease, or versus this is a disease that maybe had an outbreak in China.
Exactly.
There's different phrasing, there's different words, there's different ways of, looking at this and really understanding what virus is. It's not, it doesn't have borders, it doesn't have walls, it doesn't, there's so much we have to do, understand about our own perceptions. Number one, taking responsibility. Number two. Number three, understanding our own words and phrases and what we're doing to model appropriate behavior for community, in community.
It's true. And I wanted to so I pulled it right from their website, from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, because there's so much garbage out there, and garbage in, garbage out. And I just want to clear it for the record. It says, these are their quotes: being Chinese or Asian American does not increase the chance of getting or spreading COVID-19. People, including those of Asian descent who have not recently been in the area of ongoing spread of COVID-19 or have been in contact with a person who is a confirmed or suspected case of COVID-19, are not at a greater risk of acquiring or spreading it to other Americans. Viruses cannot target people from specific population, ethnicities, or racial backgrounds. So those are the facts. Right. But then you hear things about, like, did you read this on, it was on LinkedIn. It was a Georgia State University professor. Her name was Rosalind Chow. She wrote an article.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
But it was, this is a professor at Georgia State University. She was on a flight. This was at the end of February, so before I had those incidents at the airport. Okay. And she said she saw a woman in front of her kind of raise her cell phone up and take a selfie of the person behind her and send it to a friend. And then she was sitting next to the friend and saw the message coming back saying, "Oh no, is he Chinese?"
Oh, wow.
And then across the aisle from her, there was she learned later on that there was a man, a Korean American man, and a woman sitting next to him. She leaned over to the person sitting in the next seat and said, "There's a lot of them, pray for me."
Oh, goodness. Oh my goodness. So now here we're perpetuating, the false truth, the misconception,
Exactly.
And here's the thing too. I've lived out of the country. I actually lived on a small island off of Japan called Okinawa. And when I lived there for 3 years, what I learned about the Okinawans is, one, they're very clean people. Number two, they actually wear gloves and masks on a regular basis. Not even if they're sick, just to keep from getting other people sick or keep themselves from getting sick. So they're very, very cautious and aware of health and wellness. So it's something that they've been doing just as a prophylactic, let's say, on, in their own lives, just to keep their own wellness, to maintain their own wellness.
And this is the thing, right? So this is what she said in her article. She's like, "Oh, this is becoming more widespread." And what she said next was really something that touched me too, because I felt this way at the airport when I went. She wrote, "My fear my fear is coughing in public, coughing while Asian, and the reaction other people will have." She's Chinese, and she's saying that. I felt the same way. I'm not even Chinese. I'm like, if I cough, people are gonna look at me like I've got the virus.
Oh.
Did you do that?
I totally get what you're saying. Because here's the thing. I was coming back from California to DC. Let's see, March 12th. That was on March 12th. So we're already into this, right? I'm already
Mhm.
cleaning things down. I've got wipes. So before I even sit on my chair, I'm wiping down my chair. I'm wiping down the side of the airplane. I'm
Mhm.
wiping down my little tray. I have gloves. I have all this stuff, right? But I'm thinking to myself, every time I'm on an airplane and that air comes on, I get stuffy. I start sneezing. So I'm
Me
thinking,
too.
oh my gosh, people are going to start looking at me, right? But I know myself. I'm triggered by allergens. So when that happens or air in my face, it triggers me right away. Hey, Sam, I want to say hi to the people. Sam says they did to my wife and they put her to the front of the line in the market just so she could
Mm.
leave. Wow.
That's awful.
Yeah.
That's so awful. And
Yeah.
I've been talking to people too, Sam, that have been dealing with the same thing. I mean, you might have heard of this story in San Francisco. It was an environmental scientist or an engineer. This person came back from China, but he was way far away from Wuhan, wasn't even anywhere near there, and was sent home for 14 days and said he could not come back to work without a doctor's note.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this is now going from us getting those looks and being treated out, and now it's impacting people at work, right? And
Right.
it's now becoming a bigger, more
Right.
widespread issue.
Well, and now it's evolved into not just a discriminatory issue, but now we do have to look at, because
Mhm.
we're in a different situation now, we do have to look at everybody staying home and everybody doing the same things in quarantine and washing our hands and, wearing a mask because now this is just because this virus, again, going back to a virus doesn't have any walls, it doesn't have any boundaries. It's a pandemic,
That's right.
so
And
it doesn't matter who you are, what you are, if you're strong, if you have a great immune system, a compromised immune system, you're at
yeah,
risk regardless.
that's right. And it gets even more tragic when you think about like how people are getting physically assaulted. Right? In Los Angeles, there was a man that had to deal with a racist rant, and he wasn't doing anything. There was a woman in New York that had to deal with an assault, and somebody was calling her diseased,
Oh,
in public, and then nobody's doing anything about it
okay.
either.
So
And that's the other thing.
let me ask you something, Sejal. What can people do about this? How can they get the help? Because at this point, we're looking at what's their recourse, number one. Number two, and how is this going to be a traumatic event for them? So from
Exactly.
the psychological perspective, now is there induced trauma here? And
That's right.
so, that would be something that, they might have to go see somebody for. They might have to talk about, to somebody like you, they might want to talk to somebody like you just because then you can talk to them and say, okay, this was an unconscious bias. This was a conscious bias. This was, and especially if it's in a workplace setting too. So.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I think if you're Asian American or Chinese and you're a victim of this type of behavior, absolutely do something about it. So there's a group in California, an Asian American and Pacific Islander group. They launched a reporting tool
Oh,
for people. So it's and I wrote down the website here
okay.
just so that, especially like Sam said, he had gone through it, report this stuff because
Yeah.
that's going to dictate as to what happens after all this starts to die down a little bit.
And what I'll do is I have a post on my Instagram, Facebook about this live. We'll post that link so you can report.
Perfect.
Sam also said one of my Kung Fu brothers in San Francisco is teaching Asians how to defend themselves free for 90 days just because they are being treated so badly out there. Now, of course, we don't want to have violence with violence, so we want to be able to bring that confrontation down to a manageable level where we're actually able to hopefully talk or hopefully just get away or separate ourselves from the other person who is being verbally or physically assaultive, because that can be very scary.
Agreed. Especially when somebody's making these kind of comments and acting out of fear or anxiety, or they're dealing with their own stress.
Right.
We don't know what they're going through. I think the best thing is to make sure you stay safe and take care of yourself. So the reporting website is www.asianamerican Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council. It's all one word, .org.
Okay, can you do that again?
Asian, yeah, www.Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council.org.
And is just A-N-D, not an ampersand?
Yeah,
Okay.
A-N-D.
So Asian Pacific Policy and
Planning
okay.
Council.
Uh-huh.
.org. And I'll send you the link to this too afterwards,
Okay.
so that you can post it.
Okay.
And then the other thing that's very important too is if you're dealing with it, and there's a number you can text. Okay, it's the U.S. crisis text line has been set up because to protect Asian Americans and Chinese. So if you're dealing with something like this, you can text 741-741 to that number, text the word share, SHARE, and then you'll get a text back and you could speak to a crisis counselor to help you deal with that. Okay, so these are on your own if you're personally dealing with it, and then along, of course, you have your medical insurance, and a lot of employers, in fact, I've been talking to a couple of different employers, are setting up employee resource groups so that they can provide additional resources to the Asian community who may be dealing with these kinds of issues. So those are some things you can do, but, I mean, just having personally gone through it when I grew up, I could tell you now, looking back on it, like I wish I would have done some things differently. And it is important to talk about these issues. So communicate about it with your loved ones. Talk about your feelings. Now we have social media. There's a lot that you can do online, but taking care of your physical and mental health is very important because this can spill over now into work performance, which is where I'm seeing it coming out as an attorney that's talking to employers. But also it can come out as far as, we're seeing suicide rates are starting to go up.
Right.
Also workplace violence.
Right.
So it's very important to take time to stay connected with family and friends and take care of your mental and physical health. And then as far as what I can do to help is I think that this is the perfect time to really, I mean, this doesn't really change what I was doing before COVID-19. I'm doing the same thing. My mission is to help employers create work environments where they're free of harassment. So my marching order is the same, but I think just right now where I see a lot of vulnerability and the work that I'm doing is talking to employers about really sort of not making this a back burner issue, because it seems, obviously there's a lot going on from a legal standpoint right now where like all this stuff with paid sick leave from the federal and I've sort of stayed away from that, to be honest. There are lots of attorneys that are specializing in paid sick leave and I've been kind of staying on top of it, but I'm not really giving a lot of advice on that because it is changing daily.
Right.
And I don't want to give anybody the wrong advice because I'm not really dedicating all my resources to it. But what I'm really focused in on is education, right? So educating employers, educating HR, and this is the perfect, I mean, this is a reality check. A lot of times the manager has sort of been lately, I mean, what I've seen after the Me Too movement, I've seen a lot of managers kind of take a step back and there's a big fear with supervisors now of retaliation. So they're not managing like they used to manage.
Right.
Yeah. And so they have to be involved now.
Yeah.
There is no way around it.
Right.
And so really talking to supervisors, and I can do a lot of all my trainings. It's a lot of this, all the trainings I used to offer live, I'm doing virtually.
Yeah.
But I'm doing a lot of counseling now between me and managers or me and HR. And really the areas of focus are, what do you do? If somebody comes to you and complains about experiencing this kind of racism or bullying happening in the workplace, it would be the same way you'd handle any kind of race complaint. But right now, it's a heightened sensitivity,
right.
heightened fear, heightened anxiety. So you have to act quickly and appropriately right away, right? There's no room for error right now because it's just everybody's on high alert. So
right.
really talking to them what their initial response is and actually giving them a script as to what's inappropriate responses and what are appropriate responses right. when somebody comes to you right now. And right. managers have to know what to say. There's no way around it.
Well, first of all, and I'm going to just kind of touch on something here. Managers are also part of a community that has to understand their own unconscious and conscious biases.
Yes,
right? So it's like
absolutely.
before they ever can go and really address somebody else's, I would imagine, just like us as human beings, we have to, as, and I'm going to go back to your experience about when you were in junior high and you were going through, you know, did she have lice? She has lice because she's from India, blah, 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 right? So what
Yeah,
happens is we hold on to that.
yeah,
We hold on to that experience, and that can affect our relationships. That can affect, you know, how we view the world. That can affect
yeah.
how we move through the world and who we trust and distrust because of that. Everybody is human, so we have these biases. How do you address first the importance of those who are in a place of authority or leadership to address their own stuff first?
Right. And such a great point, Summer, because that's a lot of the work that I've been doing is unconscious bias training and understanding your own biases. And it's unfortunately, you know, it's not a one-time deal. It's not like you learn about it and now you know all your biases. You know, there's
Right.
150 different types of bias. So it's an ongoing process, but a time like this is the perfect opportunity to really learn about that and really come out of this with empathy and compassion
Yeah.
and the ability to understand what people are going through, because everybody's going through something different right now, and we can't presume or make assumptions that we're all going through the same thing, or we can all work from home now and we're all okay. I mean, there's so many
Right.
biases just coming out of just the fact of working at home.
Yeah. And taking, you know, into consideration that some people don't even have the opportunity to work from home. You know,
Yeah.
some people don't, you know, first of all, they may not have their own business. Second of all, their job may not allow for them to work at home. Third, it's like, so we can't make these assumptions that people even have these jobs right now, that, you know, we're being impacted by just being paying the bills, you know,
Yeah.
and what that feels like. So I want to just touch on one thing really quickly that you had mentioned about reaching out for help, because yes, you know, my background is doctor of psychology. If
Yeah.
you're having issues, if you're having problems, even if you're reaching out to other people, maybe that is not enough. So reach out to your medical provider, reach out to a hotline, reach out to somebody who might have the more of the expertise. Reach out to me. If I can't help you, then I can also refer you to potentially somebody. So reach out to somebody if you're having a very difficult time getting through this challenging and unique time in our world, you know. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
or at any other time, if you're having a challenge where you just can't get past it, you know, you're hitting a wall over and over and over, and you're just, you know, you're taking that in and internalizing that, and you don't feel like you can, you know, reach out to other people. Reach out to somebody who can give you a resource. Reach out to somebody who can actually help support you through this process. So I just had to touch on that. But we're covering so much great material. Let me read this by Sam. In the USPO in Philadelphia, they are, I imagine that's like the newspaper or something. They are really doing a bad job at this. I have a ton of family and friends that work there. Oh, maybe the U.S. Post Office.
Yeah.
They have well-known cases of COVID-19, and they are cleaning properly, or helping their people. So, okay, they're really doing a bad job at this. Okay, so wow. Okay, so that's a tough one. I mean, yeah, we're looking at delivery people. We're looking at grocery stores. We're looking at, I mean,
Mhm.
there's so many jobs. I mean, look in the medical field. And what we forget is we also have admin there. We have cleaning people who are doing, you know, their best to clean those facilities, because if you're not in regulation in regards to the standards that that you need to be in regards to keeping that facility clean, be it a hospital or clinic, you're going to be out of business. So
Yeah.
these people
Yeah.
are so important. You know, everybody's job right now, and this is the thing, everybody should be working for one common purpose, and that is to
Mhm.
keep the health and wellness of each other,
That's right.
you know, in mind.
Right. I couldn't agree with that more. And I mean, and this is what I say over and over again, and almost every interview I say is that organizations, you know, if they wait, especially right now, we're in reactive mode at this point. Everybody is in survival reactive mode. And if I'm Chinese, if I'm Asian, and I go to my supervisor, and this could be anybody, right? It
Yeah.
could be anybody. I'm just saying that because this is the topic of our what we're talking about
Yes.
today. But like if I'm Asian and I go to my supervisor and he doesn't, he's telling me to deal with it or don't worry, we'll handle it. You can't do that right now. You cannot be reactive. You have to be proactive. So
Yes.
if you're not seeing me face to face, the supervisor has to do way more in staying in communication with me and keeping the lines of, creating an environment where if something's going on with me, if I feel like a coworker is bullying me, cyberbullying me, on Slack,
yeah,
I need a place to be able to go and talk to about that because we're at home now. So it's very easy for me to just shut my computer off and say, forget it, I'm done for the day.
yeah.
It's really going to be the supervisor's responsibility to stay connected with their employees and manage them more than ever.
And I think you bring up really, and this is something that I have been talking about on podcasts, on lives, across the board. Something that's really, really essential right now is responding versus reacting. Responding versus reacting. To react is based on a moment. It's based in emotion. The action may result in a reactive behavior versus a positive response. So do we want a reaction in response? No, we want a response to our to that. So to respond is slower in action. It is, and this is something I think is really imperative right now, is understanding what reactive and response is, being reactive versus a response. And then it's also giving yourself the opportunity to take a deep breath in, and before you speak, it's giving you an opportunity to think before you react. And it's also creating an opportunity for you to achieve an intended goal. So ultimate goal being such that you want a positive outcome. You want an initial positive outcome and you want a long-term positive outcome. So as you're responding versus reacting, think about these things. How am I taking personal responsibility for my actions? Number one. Number two, what's my goal? What's my intention? What's my ultimate goal here? What's my immediate goal? What's my ultimate goal? And for you and what we're talking about today, what you can talk about too is what would be the immediate goal? What would be the ultimate goal in relation to a response versus a reaction?
Yeah, no, and that's great. I love that because again, like I was saying earlier, I think one piece of it is the immediate response, right? When you're getting the complaint to an employee, what are you going to say? What are you not going to say? What are you going to ask? And what do you need to ask, right? So a supervisor is a neutral person, has to put themselves as a neutral fact finder when they're getting a complaint. That's the only way it works. I'm not going to go to my supervisor if I think they're not going to believe me or if they're not going to trust me or they're not going to take me seriously. I'm going to go hire an attorney.
Yeah, I love that. I love that response because that's so true. They have to be neutral and objective. And how do you during your training, what are some tips on maintaining objectivity?
Well, and this is what I tell, and this applies even if the complaint's about the supervisor themselves. Right. You're making me feel like I'm carrying the disease or whatever. Okay. So it doesn't matter whether they're saying it's a coworker or it's a third person that somebody doesn't work here or a supervisor. The supervisor has to put themselves as a neutral fact finder. So what I tell supervisors is imagine putting a imaginary hat and call it your neutral fact finding hat. And you have to first, I always tell them, thank the person that's coming to you for coming to you. It takes a lot of courage to make these kinds of complaints. I mean, there are some people that are going to file all kinds of malicious, BS complaints. I'm going to put those people in a corner. Those are not the people I'm not talking to right now. I'm talking to the people that are good people that really, truly believe they're being harassed, right? So the supervisor has to take each and every complaint seriously, regardless of what their personal beliefs are. And this ties right back into what you were saying, taking responsibility for your own biases and not making judgments. Because supervisors are, frankly, in the best position to solve complaints. They're the first line supervisor. That's the person that I should be able to go to and I should be able to trust to help me through my situation. That doesn't mean I get whatever I want. That doesn't mean if I want to work from home, you get to work from home. That's not what that means.
Right.
That means that they act reasonably. So they respond to me in a way that So I tell them to thank the person for coming to them. Thank you for coming to me. I know it takes a lot of courage for you to bring up this complaint because we're scared.
Yeah.
We're scared about our own jobs. We're scared about that person's jobs. We don't want to get anybody in trouble. We don't want to initiate a formal process. We don't want somebody to be retaliated against. You know, I just want this behavior to stop.
Right.
How do I get that behavior to stop?
Right.
So the supervisor has to express appreciation for the person coming to them.
Yeah.
And then literally what they're doing is they're being a fact finder. They're gathering information, the who, the what, the where, the how, and be careful with the why questions, because why questions can sound accusatory.
Right, right.
So they're gathering this information. And then part of what the supervisor needs to know, and this is a piece where part of my training that I provide is this is a great time right now for organizations to remind their supervisors what the discrimination policies are.
Yeah.
Because what the Asian Americans are dealing with, that's all protected category stuff, right? So this is a great opportunity. And let me tell you, lots of organizations have spent way too much time and money on keeping their training just limited to sexual harassment, but they haven't really talked about discrimination, which is, it's like, wait a second, why aren't we educating people on their rights under our discrimination laws too?
Right.
But supervisors need to know that what is included as far as the protected categories go, right? It includes ethnicity, accent, national origin, immigration status, race, color. There's a lot of different protected categories. So a supervisor needs to know what the complaint process is, where they need to go with it. Yeah. So that includes telling, is this something I need to escalate immediately? Where do I escalate it to? How do I do it? A lot of policies make these supervisors mandatory reporters.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. And that's a really good point. And one quick second here, because we did get a comment from Celia. Both mental and physical health is highly important for all of us, especially the transgender and gender non-binary community. Yes, as well. Definitely.
Absolutely true. And literally everything that we're talking about right now applies to all of the protected categories. In fact, it applies to every situation that a person gets the complaint, right? Because I agree, Celia, it's not just, we're focusing on just this piece of it because that's where we started the conversation. Right. Everything that we're talking about now applies to all vulnerable, marginalized populations that are dealing with this all the time.
Right. Absolutely. So, as we're talking here, you're saying, which I think is really important, that the supervisor, the manager has to be aware of what's going on. To keep the objectivity, they have to be a fact finder.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And then the supervisor needs to do their job, not just kind of put it on the back burner because they've got 500 other things to do. They got to act promptly, right? So they need to determine whether that complaint is urgent and requires immediate action. That requires a certain level of discretion, right? And that has to be handled properly, because if they don't respond to it appropriately right then and there and decide, do I need to refer it, this person might be placed in that same situation again, and the harm continues. The trauma continues to be inflicted on that person, right? So they need to act promptly and then refer it to the right person. And documentation, is crucial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Supervisors that don't document these kinds of issues right now are there's no way to make it. The statute of limitations just increased from 1 year to filing the complaint to 3 years. So it could be up to 5 years before we end up in court. Summer, I don't know about you. I don't know what I ate for lunch 5 days ago, let alone what happened 5 years ago.
Yeah, I get that whole process. Oh my gosh. So
yeah,
been there before.
And so documentation is key. And then there's the other piece of it is to also, this is the piece that I think gets lost a lot, is do we need to take any interim measures? Do I need to, right now we're separated, but if you and I are working on a project together and we need to be on video chat for 8 hours a day, right? We have to still, the interim measures piece doesn't go away just because we're working remotely.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. All such valid and important information.
Yeah.
Such important. Okay, so let's get back to, let me ask you a real quick question because we have just a couple of minutes here.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. So there's discrimination and then there's a bias, right? There's biases and discrimination. So let me ask you, if somebody has a thought, is it the action that they're putting behind their thought to impose on somebody else that causes it to be discrimination? You know what I mean? So from a legal perspective, like what are, what's going to be potentially held up in court in relation to, because everybody has their own beliefs and values and thoughts, right?
Yeah.
But it's
And that's normal. And that's normal, right? I mean,
right,
that we all have biases based on our life experiences and the media and our upbringing, our religions, our cultures, all of that.
right,
That's fine. It's the point is becoming aware of your bias, right? So if you don't know you have these biases and then you continue to make decisions that are excluding individuals. So
right,
right now we're talking about Asian Americans.
right.
If I've got this belief that there's a Chinese person on my team that's wearing a mask, or they must be where they're going to infect the rest of us, and I don't put them on these important projects, which is
Yeah,
now going to hold them up in their career trajectory.
right,
So action is what we're looking at. But
right.
when you're not aware of what your bias is, it's going to impact your actions, consciously or unconsciously, right?
Exactly.
Microaggressions.
Well, absolutely. Because if we go back to your own example of, how you were being discriminated against, right? Then we go back to how did that impact you both consciously and unconsciously? How did you, maneuver through the world? Were you aware of you had your own biases because of the situation that happened so long ago? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
And the good news is we can rewire them,
right.
right? I mean, that's the good
Absolutely.
news.
So,
Yeah.
and here, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I call that brain mapping. Not in the
Yeah.
sense that you're taking a picture and you see the brain map and, but what I am saying is we can remap our brains in that
Yeah.
the thoughts, phrases, words, one, we say, two, that we allow into our brain and into our psyche, right?
Yeah.
Those are two ways that we can either help ourselves or limit ourselves. So for
That's right.
instance, right now, we're seeing a lot of media coverage or focus on what's happening through the Asian community. We're seeing a lot of media coverage on maybe, things that are where the headline is crisis, emergent, and so what happens is we're kept in this fear state. And we're mapping our brains right now. We're mapping it into trauma. We're mapping it because for many of us, this is going to be an acute, one-time state of trauma. But if we continue to allow our words and phrases to dictate our thoughts, that's going to keep us into this chronic trauma phase, right? Just like how we develop our biases.
Yeah. And what about when people come back? When we get back to whatever that normal is, that,
What is
oh,
normal?
business as normal, business as usual? I doubt it. I mean, if people have suffered through this trauma, there's going to be either secondary trauma that you're bringing. I mean, there's going to be other ramifications. And I think employers need to really get ahead of that and start planning for that. Like, let's plan. What are we going to, what's our plan when people come back on how we're going to help them deal with what they've just gone through? You can't just expect people to show up now and start giving you their 100% right when they get back to the work. I mean, this is the other piece. And I mean, I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts for employers on what they should be doing to help them with trauma, because I'm getting asked that question, and I'm going to, can I send them to you, or where should I be sending these people? Because I can tell them from a legal standpoint, and I can tell them about what the trainings and the investigations and the complaints and how all of that. But as far as dealing with that trauma when people get back to work, that's another piece they have to be ready for.
Well, here's the thing, and this is, I'm so glad you brought up that piece. We have about 5 minutes. So, and I want to start wrapping this up, but I really am happy that you brought this up because remember we talked about reaction versus response. Okay, so right now during this time where people are at home and that you're going to have people coming back to work, right now start planning. Start your planning right now in regards to your response to, and I mean planning in that you're sending out texts, you're sending out emails, you're saying, hey, you know, everything is going to, you know, we're going to be prepared. We're going to be ready. It's going to be a safe environment that you're coming back to. These are the steps that we've been taking. So there's a lot of things that employers can do right now as a response to really help minimize long-term trauma. Because
Yeah.
and here's the thing, we want to minimize the long-term trauma, and it's up to us personally as well to limit how much news we're watching or how much media we're watching that's coming at us that's saying crisis, emergent, because the more we keep ourselves in that phase, we're creating neurochemical responses, and you want to minimize the negative neurochemical response in the mapping, the negative brain mapping. You start limiting your media, the amount of media that you're watching. You start limiting the words and phrases that you're using. Like, don't use crazy, don't use scared, don't use emergent, don't use crisis. Those words are going to keep you stressed. So, you know, those things are going to keep you anxious. Those things are going to keep you fearful. Let's get out of the fear state. Let's not stay in the fear state. And employers need to start prepping their employees and coming back by sending out messages that are responsive to the situation. And I keep saying, it's not crazy situation. It's a unique situation that we're all having to confront. So, okay. So thanks for asking that question. There's so much great information here. And let me thank everybody who's made a comment, who has been on here with us. Celia also said this COVID-19 is definitely going to disrupt the way that companies have defined workplace biases. And then she says, great points, Sejal and Summer. Love it, love it. So, you know, please, if you have questions for Sejal, please reach out to her. How can the people reach you?
Sure. You can reach me. So my website is www.trainextra. It's TRAINXTRA.com. The other thing I would say is join me on LinkedIn if you are on LinkedIn, because I love sharing information. And as I run into information and I think it's good, valuable information, I am always putting out guides and checklists and toolkits to help people that are in the situation. It's a tough time for everybody. And don't hesitate to email me. My email is sejal@trainextra.com. And I'd be more than happy to, like I said, if I can't answer it, I will point you in the right direction and do what I can to help.
All right. So I want to thank you so much. We're going to try and get this, you know, save this video so we can post it. We'll post it on LinkedIn. We'll post it on maybe our, you know, Instagram, TV, so pages and such. So we'll try and get it out there because there's so much great information, and make sure to reach out to Sejal on her LinkedIn. Reach out to me if you have questions about how to reduce and recognize trauma, you know, and we can work together. So thank you again for joining us on this live. Thank you so much, Sejal, for joining me today. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.